Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn and I am so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back, you guys. I freaking missed you. I miss you all the time. Like, I feel like that's just part of my intro now. I just miss ya. Especially when I'm off for a week. And go figure, the week that I decide to, just take off, rejuvenate, plan out future content, someone goes and steals my identity. So the whole week I was just dealing with that and didn't get any rest and didn't rejuvenate, but I missed you guys so much. So there was a moment where I was like, I need another week. And then I was like, I absolutely can't do it. My heart will not handle it because I miss you guys so much. So here we are. We're almost all sorted with the whole identity thing. I'll do a whole video on it, primarily to vent a little bit, but also just to give you guys some tips along the way how you can protect yourself, or if it does happen to you, just how to make it a little bit easier, because I felt like really alone and didn't know where to go, what to do, and I feel like that added so much more stress. So if we can just kind of like streamline it a little bit and make it easier and more difficult for people to do this to somebody, then I want to help. Also, love how I've just tried to like bypass the whole makeover thing. You can't really tell in the viewfinder because it cuts off here, but you guys, I chopped my hair. I do not remember the last time I had hair this short, but look, it like looks still long, doesn't it? My husband like has me feeling like I think like I cut it here, which I kind of want to do. Shout out to my girl Shayla. She's just the most amazing in the whole world. So if you are in Edmonton and you need a great hairdresser, go and see her. I will put her Instagram right here. I will also have it in the bottom. She's lovely. I don't know if it was like because of like my mental breakdown because of what was happening with my identity, but like when you have mental breakdowns and you just like deal with it by like drastically changing your hair, part of that could have been what's going on here, but I'm not mad about it. I'm really excited. Back to the dark side. I love when my hair is dark. Okay. You guys, let's get started. First, I wanted to give a special shout out to South Africa. I've had a few people reach out to me telling me that we are trending there. I don't even know what's going on. And I just don't know what to say. I'm so excited. Mostly, I'm just so thankful for all of you who watch, because this is not like a me accomplishment. This is everybody who shares my videos, tells their friends, tells their family, tells their dog walkers, shares it in groups that you're in. Like, this is all you. It's all word of mouth. It's all you guys hyping me up and making people like curious as to like what's going down over on this channel and wanting to join the family. And I'm just so thankful for you guys. So thank you so much. You know, I can never put into words how much I appreciate you. I hope that it comes through, that you guys can feel just like the love bursting out of my chest for you. Okay, so today we are talking about a case that has been highly requested. You guys really want this one, so here we are. I also want to thank the lovely Arwen for helping me with some questions I had on this one and reaching out to offer her services. I'm so thankful and appreciative for you, mama. I love ya. I've got to say, I didn't think I could be more floored than when we did the case on Dorothea Puentes, who was the elderly landlady who was killing and burying her tenants in the backyard, or Dana Sue Gray, who was the former nurse who was killing elderly people for financial gain to pretty much go shopping. But this guy is literally what would happen if you like mashed the two together and just like kicked it into overdrive. I cannot believe this is real life. You are going to need a snack, need a beverage, get your rag, get your homework, prepare yourself for whatever you are doing whilst watching today. Today, I am going to indulge in my non-alcoholic Heineken. If anybody out there is pregnant right now or just doesn't drink anymore, but you've got like that craving for a beer and you don't want the alcohol, you guys, Heineken has nailed it. So good. I used to love the Budweiser. Why can't I talk today, Brack? The Budweiser Prohibition, but oh my God, way to go, Heineken. That's what we're doing today. This glass is filthy. Good thing you guys don't have to drink out of it. Oh no, I got distracted by the dirty glass. It's all foam. I don't know how you guys do it where you're from or if you have Clamato where you're at, but this is how I like my beer. So I always just add like a little splasheroo of some clam in there. So good. So cheers. Let's get started. So today we are talking about Dr. Harold Shipman and the murder spree he went on that lasted over 25 years and took the life of approximately 250 people. 250. How does this happen? What the F is wrong with you? I don't know. He didn't have a horrible childhood. He wasn't deprived. And kind of what's eerie is when you look at a lot of those notorious serial killers like Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer, like neither did they. They had, like a typical upbringing, and that's what's so bone-chilling about these cases. So he was born on January 14th, 1946 to Vera and Harold Shipman. He was the middle child, so there was 3 of them, but he was the first son, so he shared a name with his father, but his family called him Fred so that they wouldn't get like Harold and Harold mixed up. And the family lived in Sherwood, Nottingham, which if you are a Robin Hood fan, yep, that Nottingham. He was no Robin Hood. And they lived in a council estate, which for me was new. I didn't know what that was. But if you're like Canadian or American, it seems like it's like almost like townhouse condominium style, but it's like clustered together in a little community. And they weren't rich, they weren't poor. They, were an average family. And Harold was his mother's favorite. Like everybody knew that about him. She saw something in him that was special, I guess. She thought that he was gifted and that he was kind of going to be like the ticket of the family succeeding. So for her, she really poured a lot of energy into nurturing and, just encouraging him and letting him know, you can do anything, which is great, but it was only, focused on him. And then when he got into this all boys school, to her, that was just, like such a huge achievement, and that favoritism only increased. And I mean, he did well in school, but he wasn't like academically gifted. He had to work for his grades. And so it wasn't, necessarily as she was perceiving it, that he was this genius. Really, the only subject that he was naturally just really great at was science. For him, he was actually more gifted in the terms of like athletics. Why do I try? He played rugby. He was a long distance runner. I think he was also like the vice captain of the athletic team in high school. So again, like all around guy. He didn't have a lot of friends. He wasn't a loner per se, but he wasn't like super popular. And I think it's because he rubbed people the wrong way. It wasn't like he was like introverted or awkward. He just had this arrogant air about him. And I think most of it was attributed just because of the way that his mom really like always boosted him and fluffed his ego for him. And it's interesting because I wonder that if life played out for his mother differently, would we be in this situation? Because sadly, when he was 17 years old, she was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. And this was in the 60s. And in the 60s, they didn't know too much about it. So if you got this diagnosis, you were prepared to have a very long, dragged out, painful passing. And I guess Harold's father, Harold, wasn't at home much. He was working like overtime to try to just compensate for medical expenses and the fact that his mom couldn't help out. So the responsibility to care for Vera was primarily put on Harold. So he would rush home after school and make sure that he met up with the doctor, who would come every day to administer an injection of morphine for her so that it could hold her over for like 24 hours for her pain. I guess when she passed away, Harold was present, which would probably be, a little bit traumatic. It would be very understandable if you needed, a day or two to just process and grieve and just collect yourself. But Harold just like went right back to school, and his friend was just casually having conversation with him while they were walking and was like, hey, did you do anything exciting this weekend? And he was like, no, my mom died. And like, you're your mom's favorite. I get that in like terminal situations, family and friends, they're able to kind of mentally prepare and ease that, shocking grief and just like utter devastation. But to just be like, no, nothing really interesting. Yeah, my mom died. So it just appears that he naturally was just very unattached to like grief and death. And it was after his mom passed away that he started expressing that he was very interested in becoming a doctor. there's no proof that it is linked to anything that has to do with his mom dying, but no one remembers him ever speaking about, wanting to be a doctor prior to her passing away. And I mean, we also don't know what his deep down intentions were to be a doctor. I personally don't feel it was like, oh, I want to do really well and, heal the world and be there for everybody. I also don't think he initially went into it to be like, I would love to just take the lives of 250 people. I think it was somewhere where he had this like morbid curiosity, and it probably started by like seeing the deterioration of his mother, seeing like how drugs were administered to like alleviate pain and how and when to do that. And probably for him, who's like somebody who had this kind of like God complex, having the lives of people in your hand was, I'm sure, quite appealing. His classmates kind of back up that assumption because they said for them, the first time they were introduced to working and, examining cadavers, everyone was just a little bit like, oh, okay, you're gonna do it. You don't freak out and be like super immature about it, but, you're getting ready to like see a dead body for the first time and study and stuff like that. It's just a little bit different, but he was really excited about it, and he would even stay after class hours to just like sit and look and study. And I mean, we need morticians and we need medical examiners and people who are interested in speaking for the dead, but when you're going to school to like do polar opposite of like trying to keep somebody alive, like the death fascination was a little bit alarming to read about. Anyway, so he would commute every day to school on this, not a school bus, I think it was like a public bus. And every day on the same route, there would be this girl, and her name was Primrose. She was a window dresser, which if you are like me and didn't know there was a name for this, these are the people who do like really beautiful designs in store windows to like attract people to come in and buy stuff. And her friends describe her as really fun, funny, like kind of like giggly, like schoolgirly, hyper chatty, you know what I mean? She was a few years younger than Harold, but he caught her eye. She was like, oh, like a little older guy. I'm into it. So they started talking on their bus rides together, and then that eventually progressed to going for like a coffee date here and there. And then not long after, they started dating, and then they experienced an unexpected pregnancy. It sounds like Primrose was really pumped about it, but Harold not so much. His friend said that he was not prepared to be like locked down at all. Primrose was his first girlfriend. He was wanting to, get to a point in life where he could play the field, experiment a little bit. I mean, this guy had never even taken anybody to a school dance before. I read that he used to take his sister because he was just like, I think, awkward around girls. So like that would be his plus one at the dance, was just like his sister hanging out. So now it's like, boom, you get your first girlfriend and you are locked down. So they got married. She was 17, he was 20, and they had 4 kids together. They had 3 sons and a daughter. So he's now a dad and a husband, and he's going to school to be a doctor. And I think the pressure got to him. He started experimenting with a drug called pethidine, I believe it is called. I'm sure I've messed this up. I guess this drug is really intense, and it was used, I don't know if it's still being used in some places, but primarily its use is for labor and delivery doctors to give to mothers who are just experiencing like a really painful labor. And I guess this drug is no joke. Like it will knock you on your butt for like days. So it's surprising that he was able to use it and conceal it while going through school. And he graduated. I read that it was like barely, but I mean, he still did. And since drugs are measured in like clinics and hospitals, they think that what Harold used to do was order a prescription for a patient, and then he would administer half the dose to that patient and then like pocket the rest and use it for himself later. And this is going to be a pattern he will repeat later on in the story. So after graduating, he started working at a hospital, and nurses who would work on the same ward as him would notice that there would be an alarming number of patients that would pass away. Also, patients that would be administered like different levels of a drug, almost like experimentally. It was like, okay, like if I give this much to this person, at what point is like the tipping point where they might need resuscitation, or what's like the pain level minimum. You know what I mean? Like everyone was getting like wacky drug injections. Nothing was investigated though, because primarily the people that were on these units were terminally ill. So doctors and nurses just kind of explained it away that like, okay, maybe this one was a little bit more frail. They couldn't handle this dose. They just didn't really know what was going on and didn't automatically go to like somebody's doing this to them. But then there were patients that were being brought in that weren't terminally ill. They were being brought in for things like, possible signs of a heart attack, and they were being monitored, and it seemed like they were stable and just, staying for further observation, and then like suddenly like they die. I guess after one of these incidents where a patient died like very similarly to that, a nurse did bring forward like concerns to a doctor that was higher up that I think this guy was doing okay, and then Dr. Shipman went in, and then all of a sudden he's passed away, like maybe we should investigate this. And he was questioned about it, but he was able to somehow talk his way out of it. And then, conveniently, after he was spoken to, everything stopped. So after, he's got suspicious eyes on him, he answers this ad to be a GP at this clinic that put something in the paper. And he was pretty much hired right on the spot, and he started his practice there in 1974. At the beginning, other doctors said that they liked him. He was, like the young buck on campus. He still had like that zest for the practice and wanting to go over and above to help everybody out. He was like the first to get there, the last to leave, like really eager to be a good doctor in their eyes. And for his personal life, it appeared that he was, excelling as well. He and Primrose bought a house in a nice family-orientated neighborhood. Descriptions of her from neighbors and friends vary. Some people looked at her as very timid and somebody who might have been bullied by her husband because he thought that, he was above her and more intelligent and the provider. But then there's also people who say she was, nothing like that and not a woman to be pushed around. She was outspoken, she was loud. Regardless, either side agreed that A, she was a great mother, and B, she was not a great housekeeper. I guess their house was not clean at all. Like it was to the point where it's been brought up like so many times in so many articles and books about him. It was like in that much disarray. Like the carpet was described as just looking like somebody just like ran mud across it, and just, probably not what you would want to know like your doctor goes home to all the time. I don't know. There's probably the factor that he might have not even really like cared because he was numb, because he's still abusing drugs at this time. And it's been about 5 years into his addiction, and it's gotten so bad that like all of his veins are collapsing pretty much. And no one was aware. But then there was a pharmacist who went to one of the nurses at the clinic, and he was like, yo, what is up with all of these prescriptions coming from Dr. Shipman? And she was like, yeah, that's not right at all. There's no way he should even be ordering these drugs whatsoever, let alone in like volumes that high. So she brings the concern to the other doctors in the clinic, and they confront him. I guess he didn't deny it. There was really no way he could. Like the proof was right there for them. And initially, I guess he was like, okay, I'm going to be super cooperative. You guys can do an investigation. I'm going to go to treatment. I did this. And then almost instantly, I think it was like the next day, he just came back to work with this like arrogance about him. And he was like, like, screw that. I'm not participating in any investigation. I'm not going anywhere. Good luck with that. I'm staying put, which didn't go well. Like he had to leave. His partners were like, yeah, nice try, bucko. Peace. And he packs up his practice and his home, and they move away. He does check himself into a treatment center, and there is an investigation that's done. He's proven guilty, but really the only consequence that he had at all was just a fine, and it was really, really small. Like I honestly think it was like 250 pounds. Something like that. Like to me, I was like, that's ridiculous. For somebody who was like abusing their power as a doctor and like writing illegal prescriptions and stuff to sustain a drug habit, it was like a slap on the wrist. So he was able to work freely again. He goes to a child development clinic, and at this place he's, not able to write prescriptions for patients. He's under supervision. I think he stays there for about like a year and a half during that like waiting period, and then he decides to open up a practice where he again becomes a GP. So for about a year into that, everything seems to be going really well. He's building a really solid base of patients, and everybody thinks he's just so lovely. They have nothing but the greatest things to say about him. And one thing particularly that they like is that he goes above and beyond, and it's hard to find a doctor that would do that nowadays, where he would make like house calls and, try to make people feel like special and like that he's concerned about them. And I mean, that's top-notch service, right? Well, it would be, until patients started dying after his visits. And these weren't people who were terminally ill where, their loved ones were expecting this to happen. This was very unexpected, and primarily usually to people who, family and friends would describe as like very young at heart and like still super lively and had like years and years and years to still like live. For one instance, there was an 86-year-old woman who was a widow. She got a house call from Dr. Shipman, and her daughter said that she was super active. She would run in fields with her grandkids, not frail, no health issues, like no sign of slowing down. And her daughter says that she had made plans with her mom to just like pop by and have a visit. And when she gets there, Dr. Shipman's there, and he's like leaning over her mom in her bed, and she's like, whoa, what's going on? And he's a little bit startled at first, but super quick on his feet. So he's like, oh, your mom, just called me and said that she was experiencing chest pain, so I came to check on her. And when I got here, she collapsed, and I just tried to resuscitate her, and I think she's gone. And this daughter just describes being in complete shock. Like there was no indication that her mom was deteriorating at all. Like I said, she just felt like she had years left with her. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, she's suddenly gone. But it's her mom's doctor who's telling her this, who she knows like her mom loved so much, appreciated so much. And I mean, I think like any one of us who would hear from our loved one's doctor would be like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, this does happen. It's awful. We weren't expecting it, but we trust you. And then there was a handful more deaths that happened very similarly. And then it seemed like year after year, the numbers would increase. It got to the point that at the clinic he worked at, there was like an inside joke that they would call him Dr. Death because his patient load was primarily elderly people. So he was always signing off on death certificates. For the most part, that's how it was seen. Just, okay, he's a doctor who specializes in caring for elderly people. This is going to happen in high numbers. Don't really think much of it. There was an investigation with the son of one patient whose father passed away, and he had mentioned Dr. Shipman with a few other doctors, and nothing really came of it. They weren't able to prove any form of malpractice. And again, like in the investigation with the hospital, conveniently for about over a year, nobody else passes away. And then after the waiting period, there'd be like 10 to 12 patients a year that would pass away. And it seemed like there was a pattern going on. The records would show that like in close proximity, there would be a terminally ill patient who would pass away. And generally it would be one of Dr. Shipman's patients, and he would be called to the scene. When he would get there to check on his patient and, declare him dead, he would pocket any of the remaining painkillers, which was primarily morphine, and he would save it for later. And then within days, sometimes even the exact same day, there would be a perfectly healthy patient who would die. Some of these patients who were passing away were even like children to the parent who had died, or neighbors. If you were a problematic patient who would like call and have concerns and stuff like that, you'd soon like find yourself getting a house visit from him and then never, waking up when he left. There had been several cases, but not as many as like the healthy, shocking ones. But there were some where there would be a patient who was terminally ill, but not right in like the last hours and days of their illness. And Dr. Shipman would go to the house. He would go and check on them, administer some pain medication, often family would be there. So it just goes to show like how sick and twisted and brazen he was. He would carry on a conversation with the family member and then just look over and be like, oh yeah, they're gone now. And they'd be like, oh, what? Some of them felt like there was a part of them that knew it was because of whatever he had given to them, but they didn't think anything sinister of it. They almost thought it was like accelerating, the process and putting their loved one out of misery and not having to suffer from pain anymore. So no investigations were done on that, and not really any red flags were going around. And then there was a death of a woman named Kathleen, and it changed everything. She was 80 years old, and again, she acted very young, and not like just, like a couple years younger. People said like 25 years old. Like she could keep up with anybody. Great health, full of life, very active in her community, super popular, just like everybody loved her. So one day she's supposed to be the one to provide like snacks and food at this like social gathering she's having with some friends, and she doesn't show up, which is extremely unlike her. So her friends are like, I think we should go and check on her because I think something's up. So they go to her house, and sure enough, they find her, and she's passed away in her bed. So they call the ambulance, and conveniently Dr. Shipman, her doctor, also comes to the scene. He's the one who pronounces her dead, and he's like, oh, it's probably a heart attack, just like her husband had suffered a few years prior. But her daughter was feeling like something was up. She had just spoken to her, I think that day or the day prior. And again, there was like no signs. She was super excited, not sick, didn't have like a cold or anything like that. And she and some of Kathleen's friends had said they knew Dr. Shipman were coming to the house because Kathleen had mentioned he was popping by to take a blood sample from her. So when he's questioned about it and they're like, what's with this blood sample? Like she seemed fine. He said, oh no, like she had called the clinic a couple days ago and she wasn't feeling well. And I came by to check on her and she looked very frail. Like all of a sudden he said like, she was looking like this like decrepit woman who just like couldn't function anymore. So he said he did want to take a blood sample from her and see if she was anemic. He said he got the sample, but then the lab lost it, so he couldn't provide it to investigators to show them that like he had actually come for this sample. And then to some people that story was different or had changed. He said that he did keep the blood sample, but he got so busy during the day that he forgot to submit it, so it was like expired or something. I don't know how that works or if that's even a thing, but that was the explanation he gave, and that he needed to come back to take another one. And for Kathleen's daughter, it wasn't even like the conflicting stories that made her like spidey senses tingle. It was the details in what he was saying, because he said that when he got to the house, Kathleen came to the door and she was in like a house robe and she was in her pajamas and just like not presentable, like messy hair and stuff, like she had just kind of got up, which made so much sense to me because she was like, oh no, like if my mom is well enough to like stand up, this woman is going to change her clothes, brush her hair, even if it takes like every ounce of strength, and answer the door like if she knew someone was coming. And for me, like I know that sounds outrageous maybe to some people, but like my mom would totally do the same thing. Like this woman wakes up ready to take on the day, does not come down to start her day unless she is like completely prim and proper. So she also wouldn't like if she was expecting somebody to come to the door, even if she wasn't feeling well, she would like put herself together. So her daughter shares her suspicions with police, and then she's talking with Kathleen's friends too, like being like something's not right, and realizes that they're also feeling the same too, but didn't really like verbalize, because like every other family member who's kind of experienced something like this, they're like, you just kind of take the doctor's word for it at face value, and it's just like this tragic, unfortunate event. So Kathleen's friend said that they were suspicious also because they had spoke to her just like her daughter had. There was nothing out of the ordinary. She was going to be the one to prepare and bring the food to this event. She didn't call anybody to say, like I'm kind of under the weather, I'm not coming. And they also knew about this, routine blood sample, but they also had another piece to this puzzle, and they said, he also had Kathleen sign some documents a couple days prior, and they thought that it was like tied to this whole blood sample thing. And her daughter's like, documents? Like, what documents? Yeah, the family soon found out the documents were a change in her will to remove her family and leave everything to Dr. Shipman. Okay, bud. So her daughter sees this letter, and again, it's not necessarily the letter that like raises any suspicion for her, but it's the way that it is presented. So this letter, I guess, was typed out, and first of all, she said that her mother had beautiful penmanship and she wrote everything out, like didn't use a typewriter or anything like that, didn't need to, and just liked her own, liked to write letters. And the other thing that raised a red flag for her was that the A, the E, and the W key on the letter were all like jaggedy. So there must have been like a malfunction in the typewriter. So anytime those keys were used, it was like all like out of sorts and just didn't look like nice and crisp and clean, which again, for a woman who was a perfectionist, she thought, if this is a legal document, you're changing a will and you can see like this looks just like sloppy and messy. She was like, like my mom would have nothing to do with this. And again, this resonates so strongly for me because my mom's writing is just like pure perfection. It looks like calligraphy. And if she was preparing a document like as important as a will and it was just like all like sloppy like that, she'd never be like, yeah, that'll do. Like this woman makes highlighted file folders for like one 45-minute flight to like go visit my sister in BC. It totally made sense to me because I was like, yeah, those would be red flags for me also. So she obviously brings up these concerns to the investigators and they go to Dr. Shipman's clinic and they're like, hey, like we've got to look into this will. And almost just like without even being prompted, he brings up the fact that he has a typewriter there that Kathleen would borrow, and he brings them right to it to show them. And sure enough, when they put a piece of paper in and start messing with the keys, the A, the E, and the W are all jaggedy. So they track down the two people who signed as witnesses on this document, and it turns out that they were two of Dr. Shipman's patients. And they were really cooperative. They remember the day they were at the clinic, and Dr. Shipman was just like, hey, so-and-so and so-and-so, can you guys come back here for a second? I just need you to witness and sign a document for me. And they're like, yeah, sure. So they go to this back room. They see who they believe is Kathleen. They said she was like an older woman. She signed a document. They witnessed it, and that was it. But then when the investigators showed them the letter, one of the witnesses was like, that, I don't remember the document specifically, but this letter doesn't look familiar, doesn't look like what I signed, and that signature is not my signature. I signed my name, and this name was like printed. So investigators think they figured out what was going on and that these witnesses and Kathleen signed something completely different. Friends of hers had said, this is just so like sad and just disgusting to me. Dr. Shipman had approached Kathleen and was like, you are just such a great example of the study that we're doing. You are this like prime example of what can happen if somebody takes such good care of themselves. They can live forever. You're 85 years old, yet you act like you're 25. We're doing this study of like how this can happen, and maybe if we can find out certain things you do in your life to prolong it so you can be a great example for other people. But we need to take a blood sample from you, so we're going to need you to sign this in order to participate in this study. So she was just like so honored and just like, so proud of herself. Like, yeah, look at me. I'm like a freaking rock star, just like killing it out here. And that's not what this was at all. So what he did was got her to sign this false document. I don't think it was ever found. Probably outlined this fabricated study that he'd made up. And then these witnesses signed that. And then he traced over the signatures. We still don't know why he never traced over the one witness and just like wrote it out. It makes absolutely no sense when you had the signature, but he didn't. And so he just, falsified this will instead, and even went so far as to say that her wishes on the will were to be cremated so that he would hopefully be able to get rid of any evidence. Luckily, however, the family didn't receive this will before the burial, so she was buried because her family said, like, they knew she always said that those were her wishes. So the cremation thing happened after the fact, and she was already buried, which was good because they were able to exhume her body not long after her burial. So when they examine her body, they sure enough discover high amounts of morphine in her tissues. And the detectives were almost like laughing at Dr. Shipman because they're like, as a doctor, you know, you have a plethora of options that are more undetectable, and you choose morphine, which is very detectable for us. So they were, you know, thankful that he was that negligent, probably just arrogant also, that he didn't think he was going to get caught, and used this drug that he was his drug of choice to use to kill people. Another thing that he did that was just like kind of, you know, a little bit idiotic on his part, which is, you know, we're thankful for these moments, was when he found out that they were going to exhume her body, he goes into her records, and these are all on the computer. He doesn't use like old-fashioned filing folder system. It's all computerized. So he goes into her file and he tries to like backdate visits, and he puts on there that this 80-year-old woman is coming to his clinic and that he is suspecting her of abusing drugs. Like, stop. You're disgusting. So when the police confront him, he shares that with them. He's like, you know, like, I actually don't even think it was a heart attack. I think that she was a drug abuser, and I've got a whole file here. But they're able to like check, you know, behind the scenes in the computer. Just because he put like, you know, March 15th on the computer, they can see that it wasn't that. It was after she had already passed away that he made this whole new chart and all these like concerns and suspicions in there. You know, for a doctor, not so bright. So they don't believe him, and he's charged with murder. And when the story breaks, like, people in town were floored. For the most part, all you heard was that he was just so loved, very respected, like this active part of the community. He had a full patient load with like a long list of people on a waiting list for when spots opened up that could be his patient. So when this hit the papers, he had an army behind him that was defending him. Even some people who had passed away under his care, their family members were like not even concerned at all. They were like, no, there's no way he could have done this. And they defended him. As people got to talking, though, and processing and digesting, they're sharing more stories among each other because, I mean, initially you never question, you know, like, oh, how many patients have you had that have died this year, doctor? Like, this not questions you ask your doctor. And you don't go around town trying to find like similar situations of people with your doctor if you've had a loved one pass away. But now, since this was like front page news, people are like, okay, I have a very similar story. There was one family that came forward after reading Kathleen's story that was very similar. She was almost, I think, the same age as Kathleen, very lively. Her son lived with her, and he had seen her in the morning. I think she even told him, you know, let me know what you want me to have prepared for dinner for when you come home from your shift, and, you know, like, see you later. And when he comes home, he finds his mother, and she's like slumped over in her chair. It looks like she's just like peacefully sleeping, but when he goes over, he realizes she's passed away, and he calls an ambulance. And as he's just kind of like pacing the living room, gathering his sorts, waiting for them, he sees a note from Dr. Shipman, and it says that he had been there earlier and that his mother was showing signs of a possible stroke, but that she had refused to go to the hospital. So he just left her and didn't call an ambulance, and that, you know, he just wanted her son to give him a shout when he got home to let him know how she was doing. How kind. So the family was really upset with him for not just like pulling rank and calling an ambulance, but again, they didn't think anything of it, and they just took it at face value and thought like, yeah, it was a really shitty decision on his part, but I guess he was respecting her wishes. I think her son actually even called Dr. Shipman to be like, hey, what's up? Like, what happened? And he was just pretty much undermined by the doctor. He was like, well, like, you know her, she's a very difficult woman to deal with. Like, if I can't make her go to the hospital, I can't make her go to the hospital. And really, like, if she was going to die anyways, at least she got to die at home and not in the hospital where she didn't even want to be. Basically, like, you're welcome. I let her die at home alone. And so more people are coming forward with similar stories, that this is usually his demeanor when somebody comes to the scene and are like, oh my God, what happened? Like, he just is really aggressive, heartless, cold, like not at all compassionate to the fact that, their loved one is dead. And one of his, famous phrases was usually, oh, she would have died on the way to the hospital or would have died at the hospital anyways. He even would tell people that he didn't try to resuscitate a loved one if he was present for the death because there was a chance they could survive but be in a vegetative state, so they wouldn't want to live that way anyways. Like, he would mind with people and be like, I did them a favor. And I guess when you're like left to like just kind of like sit and stew in that, you're just like, oh yeah, okay, like I guess that probably is a better situation, So thank God Kathleen's family went public and the story broke, because within 24 hours, like the phone lines were completely lit up. I think there was like 60 names that were added to a list of patients that had died under his care within less than 24 hours. So now investigators had all of these names, and again, like luckily for them, everything was on a computer system, so they were able to go back and see that every single one of these charts was backdated, and all of these visits were just like completely made up to have these symptoms that these people never even had. I don't even think half of them even came to the clinic. There were instances where somebody would come in with like maybe a little bit of a chest cold, and like boom, that was perfect opportunity for him to completely turn it around and use it as an excuse to like pneumonia or something that took a turn for the worst. But they could see that he was like completely falsifying these medical records. And the stories, they just don't stop. They just keep coming in. There's another story similar to Kathleen where there's a woman in her 70s who just had spoken to her son. She was so excited because she was going to visit the Holy Land with her church group. This had been like a bucket list moment for her. The next day, it's Dr. Shipman who conveniently finds her in almost the exact same way as so many of his other patients. She's sitting in the chair with just kind of looks like she's peacefully resting. And that's one thing that I heard is very rare. Although you kind of hope that, when your time comes, you're going to be, old in your chair or in your bed and you're just going to peacefully go in your sleep. But it usually, if it's going to happen that way, it usually happens in your bed. It doesn't usually happen when you're like sitting in your chair with like a tea beside you, which a lot of these patients also had. Like they were in the middle of doing something and then all of a sudden they just like went. So although it can happen, not in the like outlandish numbers that this guy was like finding his patients in. One of my dear YouTube family members reached out to me and she actually shared a personal story of meeting Dr. Shipman once. She was visiting a friend's husband who had recently had a stroke, and all of a sudden he like walks in the door and, extends his hand to introduce himself. And she said like when she touched it, she was just like, there is something effing evil about you, bro. Stop. She just had an awful feeling and just knew. And I've heard this before of like people who have met somebody just like pure evil. They just like touch them and it's almost like they've got this like wave of like, I know you are just a piece of trash. And it's so sad that there were so many people who trusted him and just had like all of the faith in the world in him and didn't see that side. And that's how investigators think he was just able to carry this on so long, because he would just show up at their houses and have some form of excuse, probably something like, oh, we're just doing routine flu shots and thought of you because I'm in the area and, I'm going to save you a trip instead of coming to the clinic. So, these people are like, oh my gosh, like how sweet, like, you're just the absolute greatest, of course. And they lift up their arm and they're so willing to just let him do what he wants to do. And within minutes, they're gone. The only form of comfort, I guess, that you can try to pull from this is that these victims didn't suffer. I guess this is a very quick way to go. And it's not like, being poisoned where your organs completely shut down and fail and you're left in this pain and everything's like really dragged out. This is within seconds and it's almost just like this wave of just peace and calm and you go to sleep. It doesn't justify or make anything okay, but you never want to know or hear about somebody like completely suffering or just like fearing for their life. So it's the only piece that hopefully these family members who lost their loved ones can just feel like at least they didn't suffer. I just keep going back to just like how mind-blowing it is. Like somebody in power could abuse it like that, you know? And like so many serial killers, like he got brazen and he got risky. It was almost like he wanted to like test the waters and see how invincible he was. Like he didn't always target people at their home or, you know, in the hospital and they were really ill. There were 6 cases where he did it in his own clinic. Someone would just come to the clinic for just like a routine checkup or maybe a very minor concern. They'd go into the room with him and he'd come out and get the nurse and be like, oh, I need you to help me resuscitate so-and-so. They just collapsed and I think they're gone. And I guess when investigators learned about this, they asked like other fellow doctors in the area, you know, like, is this something that's like common? Do you have a lot of people pass away like in the clinic? And everybody is like, no. There was one doctor who I think he had his practice for like 15 years. And he said out of all of the 15 years, he had had one patient who passed away in clinic. And there was only one other doctor who had somebody die in the clinic as well. And it wasn't actually even a patient of his. His patient was in the room with him, and this was a family member that was waiting in the waiting room and had a heart attack there. So out of all of it, it was like one patient in 15 years. And this guy had like 6. So you knew it was like this sick satisfaction of him like doing it in public on his own turf with people around and getting away with it. I did read about this one taxi driver who was on to Dr. Shipman at one point. I think it was a mixture of like the not wanting to say it out loud and then not wanting to be questioned if he was wrong and like having to deal with like the outcome of like accusing somebody of doing something this horrific. But his story was that he also shared like a client base of a lot of Dr. Shipman's patients. So his whole niche, I guess, for his taxi driver service was to drive around elderly people and, you know, take them to appointments, help them with their groceries. That was just kind of like what he was known for. And he starts noticing that more and more and more of his clients are passing away unexpectedly. And as, you know, not overnight, but, you know, as time goes on, coincidentally, he's finding out that every single one of them is one of Dr. Shipman's patients. So I guess he brings a concern to his wife and he's like, you know, I think something's up. And she's like, you have got to be careful. Like, if you're wrong, this is just going to be like detrimental to like our livelihood. Like, don't say anything unless you are like 100% positive. So he doesn't, because I mean, she wasn't wrong. Instead, what he does is he keeps like a log of these clients of his that are also Dr. Shipman's patients, and he keeps it for years. So when finally an investigation is opened up, he has this. So now there's even more people that he's helped investigators look into and add to this like ever-growing database of people that he potentially has killed. There were a few close encounters where I also read about, and it just like gave me chills, that there potentially could have been an opportunity to, I guess it could have gone either way. Either this person who was walking into a situation could have also found themselves victim, or he could have been stopped earlier. One of them was from a patient who had contacted Dr. Shipman to, I think, change up one of her antibiotics because it was just like reacting weird to her. So he was like, yeah, sure, I'll come and do a house call because he's so kind. And he didn't know that she had also made arrangements to hang out with one of her girlfriends. So her girlfriend had been there watching TV. And when Dr. Shipman arrived, she was in the bathroom. So he didn't know anybody was there. And when she came out, she just kind of like hung around in the kitchen because she didn't want to like intrude and just like, you know, you don't want to just like come in the middle of like an exam or something like that. So she's just being respectful, hanging out in the background. And then all of a sudden, Dr. Shipman walks in the kitchen and he's like kind of like startled that someone else is there. And he's like, oh, again, quick on his feet though. He's like, she collapsed. I'm trying to resuscitate her. We've got to call an ambulance. You know, I think she's dead. There was another story of another friend again who walked in. This time the door was open, and I think they lived close by, and they were like, that's a little bit weird. Came into the house to see like what was going on, and their friend again is sitting on the couch just peacefully sleeping, and Dr. Shipman is just like perusing the living room just like ever so, you know, gracefully, looking at her china cabinet. And he's like, oh, like, who are you? And he's like, oh, I'm Dr. Shipman. Yeah, I came here. She was showing signs of a stroke and she collapsed. I couldn't resuscitate her. I'm just waiting for the ambulance to get here. And then the friend says he like goes over and he's like, oh no, it's too late. She's already gone. I'm going to cancel the ambulance and just call the coroner instead. And then they found out later that there was never an ambulance called. He was just hanging around and waiting. So it just goes to show just like, I think how invincible and arrogant he thought he was. Just being so ballsy to just like, hang around. Look at the china and crystal collection. Go in and make a snack in someone's kitchen. He even like targeted neighborhoods. Like if, you lived in a certain neighborhood, there was like 5 people on the block who had all passed away. And he had no concern that anybody would be like, that's weird that they passed away and they passed away and they passed away. And Dr. Shipman had been there that morning and now they're gone. Or that he would target families. Like there was one story where there was a gentleman who was his patient who passed away very similarly to everybody else. And then when his son had come to the clinic to get the death certificate and, thank Dr. Shipman for everything that he had done for him, Dr. Shipman was like, yeah, anytime, and please let your mom know, like anything she needs, like I'm here to support her. And I think it was within like 3 weeks, she was also killed. This guy even killed his own receptionist's mother, like your own staff. It's just so heartbreaking that it's like the trust that people had in him that let him get away with it for so long. And even the trust that their family members had in him, like they're showing up at his clinic, like thanking him for his work because why would you think otherwise? There was even a fundraiser that was started in a lot of the victims' names and his clinic profited from this fundraiser. Like he was making money off of the people he was killing and their family members like wanting to show him love and appreciation and just like thank you for doing all you could. And it's just to prey on somebody and just abuse your power of trust it's sick. So back to when they were exhuming bodies, investigators say it was just an overwhelming process. They had never experienced something like that. It's not common that you exhume one body. It was just one after another, after another, after another, after another. Like as the calls were piling in, like more and more and more people were getting added to the list to be exhumed. And they're all showing the same manner of death. Unfortunately, not every single one of them was 100% proven that he had administered morphine to them. There were a lot of factors. A lot of them, it was just time that had gone by. He'd gotten away with it for so long that decomposition had taken over. They could find like trace amounts of morphine, but never enough to be like, yeah, this was a fatal dose. And then unfortunately, you have the cases where the patients were cremated, which we now know he had a big part in, not just because of the will, but what he would do is he would pretty much always be the doctor that was there to like call the death. He would approach the family almost like he was doing, them a favor, like helping them like diminish the grief as much as he could. So he'd be like, well, and you're gonna cremate, right? Because it's just a lot of a easier transition and process to grieve from. It's also not as financially taxing. Like that's what you're gonna do, right? I'll have this ready for you so you can get that process started tomorrow. So they're just kind of like, okay, yeah, sure. So a lot of these victims were cremated. And again, it's just you're speculating based on the similar story these families have with others that he did kill them, but there's no proof. So finally, after 25 years of taking all of these innocent lives, he was stopped. It was ultimately the forged will that did him in, which is great. I do think it was on the verge of getting to the point where he would be discovered, but I don't think very fast. And we'll never know exactly why he changed it up and did the will. Investigators think it's because he had suspicion that he was going to be getting looked at and he wanted to just like up and move his practice and his family like far away and needed the money to completely start over like a brand new clinic with like machines and everything like that. So he needed somebody's inheritance to do that. His trial started on October 5th, 1999, and he was charged with 1 count of forgery and 15 murder charges. The reason why it was only 15 when people suspected it was like in the hundreds, was primarily because they didn't have all of the evidence that they needed for, you know, those situations that we talked about, like with the cremation and the decomposition, but also because they didn't want to overwhelm a jury. They wanted to make sure they could process the evidence for each case and not just like completely shut down and be like, it would be impossible for somebody to carry this out this many times. So when the trial was over, it took the jury 6 days to come back and find him guilty on all charges, and he was sentenced to life in prison. After his sentence, and even though they weren't able to prove the amount of murders he had committed, the investigators still wanted to give like some form of closure and just almost like acknowledgement to family members who weren't involved in that 15, you know, like, we believe you, we think this is what happened, and just recognition. So they open an investigation to his like 25-year practice, and they find 1,000 deaths. Of the 1,000, there was over 200 that were almost identical to every other case. So they believe that those 100% were murder, and the remaining out of the 1,000 were just natural causes. What I think is really interesting though too is that he would often brag about his ability to treat patients with heart conditions. And a lot of practitioners in the area knew that about him. Like, he could restore them to almost new. He just had this like ability to bring them back. But when he would write down the cause of death on these victims' death certificates, almost all of them would be coronary thrombosis. So it's like, it's so puzzling where there was like so many clues that could have like left to him being discovered so much sooner. Like, why does that happen? It happens so often in these cases where it's just like they get a break. I think that if there was ever like a real life Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, this guy is definitely it. Just a piece of poop, quite frankly, and a coward. Like, the fact that his victims were individuals who were vulnerable, trusting, elderly, probably wouldn't fight back in a situation where like one of them would struggle for their lives. It's just deplorable. Like, you don't fuck with 3 things in life, okay? You don't fuck with animals, you don't fuck with kids, and you don't fuck with old people, okay? There would have definitely been a special place in our Jurassic Park theme park for him, but unfortunately he couldn't take the pressures of realizing he was going to spend the rest of his life in jail, and within like 3 years of his sentence, he committed suicide. It was actually the day before his 58th birthday. So yeah, so it'd be nice if he could just like rot for a while and just think about what he did, but that's not the case. And since he's no longer here, there's no longer that opportunity for him to, you know, wake up one day maybe and want to like repent and confess what actually was the number of people that he had killed. But I think investigators and just like family members are very confident that it is like well over 200. Apologies if you are now questioning your health care provider, you guys. We went through this with Dorothea Puentes when we feared our landlords and our grandparents for a short amount of time. Don't worry, it will pass. Not all of them are pieces of garbage like this guy. But that's it for me today, you guys. Thank you so much for suggesting this case to me. I hope I was able to present it to you how you hoped. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. I will see you in the next video, and I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon.